It turns out I'm not the only one that's noticed that Marvel Comics' X-Men line is not in great shape. In fact, I would call it a catastrophe at this point. We were supposed to get something new and better in From the Ashes. It's been much more the same, but somehow still a little bit worse. And apparently this is not a deeply guarded secret. You can talk about this stuff. You can't do it on the record, but if you actually go out there and say some truth about Marvel's X-Men line, a lot of comic book pros will actually agree with you. That's what legendary X-Men creator Rob Liefeld experienced this week. He had a Robservations podcast talking about the current state of X-Men and just how bad it is. And a lot of people reached out to him and said, yes, it's an absolute train wreck. And we do know they didn't want Jed McKay on X-Men. They didn't want Gail Simone on Uncanny X-Men. They wanted big names, and all those big names turned them down. We know that Jim Lee turned them down to re-up with DC Comics. We know that Rick Remender turned them down outright just to do Giant Generator. And we do know there were a host of other really big names, and all of them said, thanks, but no thanks. Your X-Men line is an absolute disaster. Liefeld didn't hold back this week, torching Marvel's X-Men line and calling out the catastrophic creative failures behind its decline. In a scathing post, the Deadpool co-creator declared the current X-Men franchise as a train wreck, saying, I can tell you based on my DMs that comic book professionals en masse agree about the train wreck the X-Men office is. Liefeld criticized Marvel for chasing novelty over substance, flooding the line with new titles and creators who don't understand the property, and ultimately squandering what once was Marvel's crown jewel. Fans quickly jumped in the replies to agree with one writing, I'm a massive Marvel fan, and nothing they are putting out interests me. It feels dead. The X-Men line used to be about spectacle. It used to be about awesome characters coming together and those fun interpersonal dynamics, but always going out and achieving something absolutely enormous. Ideas that you barely could even understand sometimes. Today's X-Men is about identity. That's all it's about. It's not about superheroics. It's not about saving the world. It's not about going out there and exploring new parts of the Marvel universe or new parts of the galaxy and stuff like that the X-Men used to do. And they were the hottest franchise at Marvel Comics for a very long time. Sure, Amazing Spider-Man always sold very well, but you could get 3, 4, 5 books at a time out of the X-Men, all bestsellers. None of that is true today. And it all has to do with what the X-Men line has become and what Liefeld is talking about. And a lot of what we're talking about here are symptoms of the problem. People walking away, fans feeling like the brand is dead, nobody happy with the current status quo. And these are all just symptoms of a much greater problem that even Rob Liefeld, despite not really seeming to give a fuck right now, probably isn't willing to actually say out loud, but I don't care. It's because the X-Men are now a thinly disguised, and I do mean very thinly disguised, LGBTQ plus allegory within Marvel Comics, and they are not allowed to really be anything else. There are a couple of books that I would suggest people go check out. Unfortunately, none of them are ongoing. I think Cable, Love, and Chrome been really good. I think we have one issue left in that one. Web and X-Men, really cool book. Been downsized to a 5-issue miniseries, unfortunately. But outside of that, Wolverine's probably the best ongoing, and it's not good. None of it's good, and that's why they've already had to cancel like half the line within a year of the relaunch. That's how bad things are right now, because it's no longer about adventure. It's no longer about fun. It's no longer about heroics. It's only about identity. And Marvel Comics X-Men franchise has been just sitting here stewing in this quandary for such a long time that it can probably never be anything else. If Marvel Comics decided to deliver really good X-Men comic books that past fans would love with the hopes of bringing them back in, they might not show up, because they did in fact show up for House of X Powers of 10, which was exciting storytelling, a new status quo that portended really exciting things for the Marvel Comics X-Men franchise. Never went anywhere. No payoffs basically to anything. In fact, Jonathan Hickman, who did House of X Powers of 10 and had this big 3-part plan for what he wanted to do with X-Men, just left after 2 years and said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I think a lot of longtime fans, just a little bit cynical to actually come back and support X-Men comic books full time. So now they've just got to sit here in this terrible state that nobody really likes. It has no mass appeal. So the Twitter crowd can continue pirating it, and people with complete runs will still buy the X-Men and the Uncanny X-Men books and basically nothing else, other than maybe Wolverine. And Liefeld didn't stop at vague critiques. He went straight to the top. In a separate statement, he called for Marvel executive leadership to be removed, specifically naming Dan Buckley, president of Marvel Entertainment, David Bogart, senior vice president of publishing operations, and David Gabriel, senior vice president of print sales and marketing. According to Liefeld, These are decision makers responsible for the creative stagnation infecting Marvel's publishing arm. He stated bluntly, the guys at the top of the executive suite in publishing have to go. Liefeld sees Marvel's obsession with reboots, relaunches, and hollow gimmicks as a failure of vision from the highest levels, warning that the company may be on the verge of relaunching itself into oblivion. Marvel Comics' reboot crisis is becoming a real thing. The longevity of these titles, a lot of times, is 10 issues max. A really great run for Marvel Comics these days can be measured in the 30s, and they're rebooting and recycling and relaunching so fast because they've turned so many people off with their current iteration of X-Men. So many people have walked away. It can no longer support itself as a franchise. So they have to do the reboots and the gimmicks and going back to number ones and all these variant covers to cover up for the fact that the actual readers walked away. Sure, there are still some collectors out there. Yes, there are some speculators that come in from time to time. But for the most part, those loyal, diehard Wednesday warriors that were there to support the X-Men comic books, they've basically been thrown into the wind and gone in different directions. I bet a lot of them have stopped reading comic books altogether. Maybe some of them are doing Transformers right now. Maybe some of them found solace over at DC Comics, who are at least trying. But they are on the verge of oblivion. They are going to kill themselves if they can't get any type of sustainability. If there's no belief among Marvel readers that any of these stories ever matter enough to go past one or two story arcs, there is no readership, which is the foundation of the audience itself. And that is what Marvel Comics are experiencing right now. They still are the market leader. They have the market share because they put out 40 more books than DC do every single month. But they are, in fact, withering away. And I'm glad somebody out there with some real credibility in the comic book industry, like Rob Liefeld, is finally talking about this enormous problem, this catastrophe that's been going on for like 10 years, although we did have a momentary blip where it did feel like House of X Powers of 10 was going to be a moment, at least for X-Men readers to come back and rediscover just how amazing these characters are. Unfortunately, it didn't really work. Also, unfortunately, Marvel seems determined to prove Rob Liefeld right because they're resurrecting one of the most embarrassing flops of the Krakoan era, the Hellfire Gala. Marvel are releasing a single issue titled X-Men Hellfire Gala Vigil, promising to celebrate the legacy of Krakoa. Translation? Marvel is still stuck glamorizing the era that turned X-Men into a cosplay-heavy, runway-obsessed identity politics mess. The original Hellfire Gala was more like RuPaul's Drag Race than Days of Future Past, and bringing it back after the Krakoa era collapse feels like a tone-deaf attempt to double down on failure. If the X-Men were on life support, this is the creative equivalent of pulling the plug and putting glitter on the corpse. It wasn't enough that Marvel Comics sat there and embarrassed themselves time and time again during the Krakoan era with this stupid Hellfire Gala, which was supposed to be one single issue by Jerry Duggan, I think, in Marauders, and all of a sudden it became an event because Jordan White's a real fucking genius. And then somehow it became some type of an annual event, and then I think they even had like a Hellfire cosplay gala at San Diego Comic-Con. And I distinctly remember we were supposed to be putting Krakoa in the rear view. Isn't that what Tom Brevoort was literally hired by Dan Buckley to do? Maybe Rob Liefeld has a point. Maybe Dan Buckley just ain't got it anymore. And we certainly know that David Gabriel never had it. And to be honest, if Dan Buckley was a great leader, he wouldn't have only replaced Jordan White, the embarrassment that he is at Marvel Comics, with Tom Brevoort. He would have fired his ass. He would have fired a lot of people. Yet somehow, all these people have jobs, despite creating some of the most embarrassing moments in the history of X-Men. And now Tom Brevoort is so out of ideas. 1 year in, he's got nothing left that he thinks could actually work when it comes to sales. They're having to revert to the Hellfire Gala to somehow increase visibility in it. Great. I want to see Bobby Drake in drag again. That's what everybody asked for from the X-Men comics. Don't fix anything, Tom. Don't make anything better. Let's just double down, triple down on all the ideas that have made the X-Men a laughingstock over the years. And I do hope people finally do start listening to Rob Liefeld, and hopefully some of those people behind the scenes, those comic pros, will start speaking out honestly and hold Marvel to account for some of these stupid ideas, because the Hellfire Gala revisit probably isn't even the dumbest thing that they're doing. Because if that wasn't enough, Marvel just announced the return of Revelation, the cheap Apocalypse knockoff nobody wanted, created by Steve Fox in X-Men Heir of Apocalypse. Now he's returning in X-Men 19, a move so forgettable Most fans didn't even realize he'd actually arrived or left. Revelation was meant to replace Apocalypse as a mutant mythic figure, but landed with zero fan interest. Steve Fox's run was a sales and narrative dud, and instead of cutting bait, Marvel is dragging one of its worst characters from that era back into the spotlight. It's not just bad writing, it's stubborn, self-inflicted damage at this point. Liefeld is right. The X-Men are dead, and Marvel's leadership is still throwing dirt on the grave. Why would you ever bring something so spectacularly boring and stupid as Revelation, created by probably the worst writer in Marvel's bullpen right now? Yes, there are some worse writers, but nobody that gets ongoing work and consistently gets work is as bad as Steve Fox at Marvel Comics these days. And yet, we're going to take his great idea. What if we made Apocalypse gold and we made Doug Ramsey into Apocalypse? Like, it blows your mind thinking about the stupidity of some of these ideas. And in fact, Era of Apocalypse came out at the very end of the Krakoan era, and I think that might have been the first comic book that Tom Brevoort had really greenlit, or at least re-greenlit when he took over the X-Men line. And that should have been our first sign. This guy does not care. He has no feel for it. And X-Men is not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. They have done absolutely zero in From the Ashes to improve anything that was destroyed in the X-Men line over the last 10 years. Thankfully, Rob Liefeld is out there spotlighting what an enormous disaster this is, but it's probably too late at this point. There might not be any going back and fixing this. I don't know that any creator that could fix it even wants to work for them in their X-Men line at this point. They literally try to hire all of them, and they all said no. And this is what you get, a dead franchise with terrible books that are just canceling across the line with no good creative, no vision, and certainly no chance of ever achieving the glory that the X-Men franchise had there for what, like 30, 35 years, something like that? Best franchise in all of comic books, absolutely dead right now. If you appreciate this kind of honest coverage of the comic book industry, the stuff that's working, and certainly the stuff that isn't working, and you'd like to support the mission of Thinking Critical YouTube, providing an honest perspective of comic books, the best place to do that is Thinking Critical Patreon. There's a link in the video description. There's a button right here. Hope to see you there very soon. We got hours and hours of podcasts, new stuff coming out every single week.